Hello, this is Chester Hashizume, and I will be presenting this abbreviated version of my class, Discovering Your Japanese American Roots. I will be covering these topics: your ancestral hometown or furusato, your family tree or koseki, your family name or myoji, your family crest or komon, and some references that will be useful in doing your research. Before I proceed with the class, I wanted to briefly talk about my perspective of my own discovery, some of the challenges you will encounter, and the rewards I have gotten out of this hobby. I call this a journey because I view this not simply as a research activity, but a process of discovering my roots that ultimately leads me to my ancestral country, both intellectually and physically. By that I mean I discover information about my ancestors and relatives through research, but also discover and gain an understanding of where I came from by actually traveling to Japan. The experience of being in the town where my ancestors came from and meeting relatives was the true reward of my journey. Now, everyone's journey will be different, and everyone will run into bumps into the road and dead ends, but that is what makes the journey so interesting. I want to encourage everyone to not let these challenges deter you, as I had the same challenges. I'm a sansei, and like many sansei, I didn't learn Japanese, and I never talked with either my parents or grandparents about where my grandparents came from, or the reasons why they immigrated to America. Growing up on the East Coast, in a town where we were the only Japanese Americans, we also didn't experience many of the Japanese cultural traditions that are in places where there are a large number of Japanese Americans, such as Los Angeles. I think this upbringing didn't lead me to be curious about my ancestry. I didn't become interested until I was in my 30s when I moved to Southern California, and one of my uncles made a simple family tree for a reunion, and I also started volunteering for the Japanese American National Museum. I felt I was disconnected from my Japanese ancestry because I was raised to be an American without much acknowledgement of my Japanese ancestry. I bring this up because I feel that was a mental barrier to me trying to seek this connection, but became a motivation once I overcame that barrier. So where do you start? Well, the starting point is actually where your ancestors came from. Most of the Japanese immigrants to the U.S. and Hawaii from the late 1800s to the early 1900s came from rural areas and small villages, mainly from southwest Japan, for example, Hiroshima, Kumamoto, and Yamaguchi prefectures. This is important to know because the history of the Japanese family is inseparable from their native village or town of their ancestors, which is known as furusato, as families tended to live in the same village or geographic area for many hundreds of years. So finding your furusato is also important to know because it's possible, and it may be probable, that your ancestors' descendants are still living in the same area today. For my own family, both on my father's side and mother's side, I still have relatives today who are living in the same towns where our ancestors came from. So you will need to identify the village or mura, or town, also known as machi or cho, that your ancestors came from. The prefecture or ken is too large of an area to locate your ancestors, similar to locating someone in a state. The map below shows where my mother's parents came from, which was a town called Kisa, which, as you can see, was in the middle of Hiroshima Prefecture. To identify your furusato, it is the birthplace or last residence of your Issei ancestors. I suggest you ask your older relatives if they know where your ancestors came from or if they know of current relatives in Japan. This will be challenging since the Issei generation has passed and many Nisei are gone as well, or the closest generation who may know where their parents came from. I know that even many Nisei do not know what towns their parents came from, so this makes it even more difficult to find this information. If you or your relatives have any old letters or other documents or pictures from Japan that have the names of the towns, then that would also be a great source. I was able to find the hometown of my paternal grandfather from a letter written to him from one of his relatives from many years ago. Since my father had passed away and my mother didn't know, this was a great find, and that led me to also finding relatives who were still living in that town. If you're fortunate to know of relatives in Japan, then they would be the next best source. Outside of having living relatives who know this information, you will need to look at other sources to find your furusato. The major sources that are publicly and easily available in the United States are U.S. immigration records, World War II Japanese-American internment camp records, and alien registration records. The U.S. immigration records for the late 1800s and early 1900s are useful because they may identify the immigrant's hometown. This information is not always on the immigration record, but it is a potential source. As most immigration from Japan was by ship, the records are categorized by the port of entry. The primary ports of entry for Japanese immigrants are San Francisco, also known as Angel Island, Seattle, San Pedro/Los Angeles, Portland, and Hawaii. The years listed below are the periods in which records are available from the National Archives. Many of these records have been digitized and are available online, such as through Ancestry.com. I will talk later about other records that are available through Ancestry.com. One thing to note while searching these records by name is that there may be several records with the same or similar first and last names, or personal and family names, as your ancestors. So you will need to know some other information, such as their approximate age and year when they immigrated to the United States. As you are probably looking to identify their hometown, this will not help you distinguish between similar records. If you at least know the prefecture, this may be a distinguishing piece of information. Also, if you don't know the first name of your ancestor, then again, you will need to know other information to help distinguish between multiple records. Keep in mind that name spellings may not be exactly as the official spellings, because this information was transcribed by American workers from handwritten cards, who may not have transcribed the Japanese name to Romaji correctly. For example, my name, Hashizume, spelled with an E on the end, may have been transcribed as Hashizumi, spelled with an I on the end. These are two examples of San Francisco immigration records, which are difficult to read because they are snapshots of the microfilm records. So I redrew these records so the information can be read and to show the types of information. These are actually the records from my maternal grandparents. So the key piece of information, birthplace, is in the first field of the second row, which is Kisamura, Hiroshima-ken, for the top record from my grandfather, and Yamatomura, Hiroshima-ken, for the bottom record from my grandmother. As I mentioned, this field does not always identify the town or village, as I've seen just the prefecture or Japan in that field for other records. There are two other fields that could identify their hometowns: the last permanent residence on row 3, and the name and address of nearest relative or friend in country whence alien came on row 4. Again, these do not always identify the town or village. Other information of interest are the age, occupation, name of nearest relative, and ever in U.S., which indicates if this person had previously entered the U.S., along with dates and where they entered. Destination and name and address of relative or friend to join there, and seaport and date of landing. Two other things I learned from these records are: one, my grandfather had come into the U.S. twice before, first to Portland, Oregon in 1910, and then to Los Angeles in 1911, as shown in the record here. And two, on the third trip, He came with his wife, my grandmother, who was presumably a picture bride, as she was 16 years younger than him. She was 22 and he was 38 according to these records. So in addition to the hometown, these records could reveal other interesting facts about your immigrant ancestors. This is an example of the Seattle immigration record. Again, it is difficult to read because it is a snapshot of the microfilm record. As you can see, this is a different format from the San Francisco records and is a list of the passengers who are on the ship. The information is about the same as on the San Francisco records, so they have fields for the birthplace and last permanent residence. The next type of records that may have your ancestors' hometown are the War Relocation Authority, or WRA, case files for the Japanese who were interned during World War II. These include documents and correspondence, including basic identifying information, school records, camp employment, and medical records. You'll need to send a request to the National Archives, and I've listed the website where you can request that. Here's a sample page of an individual record of identifying information. Key items to note are item 5, the parents' names. So this is a record for an Issei, which is a sample for my grandfather. Then the parents' names would be the names of my maternal great-grandparents. Item 7, education, which gives the name of the town where the internee attended school in Japan. Item 8, residence outside the United States. In this sample, it only gives the prefecture, but it could give the town as well. And item 20, birth date. Item 21, birthplace. Again, this sample only gives the prefecture. Item 22, alien registration number. This will be useful in accessing the alien registration record, which is the next set of documents. The alien registration records were a result of the Alien Registration Act of 1940, which required registration of resident aliens beginning in 1940. These records can be requested from either the U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services or the National Archives. Here's the sample alien registration form. While it doesn't have the birthplace, it does have relatives who are living outside the U.S. and their addresses. However, in this sample, only the prefecture is listed. Now, when you've identified the name of the town or village, there's another complication in locating the town. Because of the Japanese government's directive to consolidate and merge smaller municipalities into larger ones to have more efficient government, there has been a significant reduction in the number of municipalities over the past 130 plus years. In 1888, there were over 71,000 municipalities, and by 2014, there were only about 1,700, which is more than a 97% reduction. This means it is a near certainty that the town or village that your ancestors came from no longer exists as a separate municipality, so you may not be able to locate it easily on a map. The named area probably still exists and still given a town designation, either Cho or Machi appended to the name, but administratively it would be part of another city. For example, my maternal grandparents came from a town called Kisa Cho, but was consolidated into Miyoshi City, or Miyoshi-shi, in 2004, and my paternal grandparents came from Terai Machi, but was consolidated into Nomi City, or Nomi-shi, in 2005. You can find the city that the town was consolidated into on the internet. This is important to know because the town is no longer an independent municipality, and any government records that may have been kept for that town would have been transferred to the consolidated city. One other note about the official administrative units. As I previously mentioned, knowing the prefecture is insufficient to locate the specific area of your furusato. In addition, the official administrative unit prior to 1868 was a province, not a prefecture. And the names and geographic areas for provinces were much different than prefectures, which have changed in the past 150 years. Initially, there were 304 prefectures in 1868, but currently there are only 47. The next topic is to understand the Japanese societal structure during and prior to the period of our Issei ancestors, that is, from the late 1800s and prior to that. The basic unit of society was the household, or ie, which was the physical dwelling that housed a multi-generational family as well as non-family members. For the traditional Japanese family and household, the roles and hierarchy were based on three factors: gender, with males higher than females; age, with older higher than younger; and kinship, that is, those who are family blood related higher than those who are not. This led to a patriarchal hierarchy, with the eldest son, or chonan, being the one who becomes head of the family and taking over the family business or farm. This also led to having the other sons moving out and establishing their own households, but still subordinate to the main household headed by the eldest son. Daughters would also move out when they got married into other families. Because of these societal roles, it was essential for a family to have a son to be the heir and family head successor. When a family had no sons, the practice of, quote, adoption became common and is still a practice in modern times. However, adoption is not the same meaning as how Americans understand it. In Japan, if a family had only daughters, when one married, her husband would become an adopted son, known as a mukoyoshi or yoshi, and he would take on his wife's family name. This is done so that the family could have a male heir to be head of the household and family business and carry on the family name. This is important to know, as you will probably have yoshis in your family tree, which would be identified as a husband not born from his wife's parents, but has his wife's family name. There are other variations of a yoshi, including adopting a young man who doesn't marry a daughter, or adopting a young man for a childless family, or adopting both a daughter and later her husband for a childless family. The key point is that the yoshi becomes part of the family as if he was born into the family and is no longer part of his birth family. This discussion about the societal and family structure was to provide the background to the key document known as the Koseki, or Household Registry or Family Registry. This is the official government record of the births, deaths, marriages, divorces, and adoptions for a household or family. This became official in 1871 with the passage of the Family Registration Law and became the legal document for individual identification and census. This means that the Koseki is the legal proof of status for every Japanese citizen. As far as updating the Koseki, each family reports changes to the local government office where the records are kept. This is not necessarily the address or town where all the members reside, since younger sons could move to another location, but they could still be kept on the original family Koseki. The original is filed with the local municipal office, and a duplicate copy is sent to the regional Ministry of Justice. Each family must report changes to their local government office. If relevant events are not reported and recorded in the Koseki, they are not officially or legally recognized. Most importantly, Japanese citizenship is recognized only if the person is recorded in a Koseki. One implication for Japanese Americans is that many Nisei were recorded on the family Koseki when they were born, meaning they became Japanese citizens as well as U.S. citizens, since they were born in the U.S. I suspect that many Nisei were unaware that they were dual citizens or found out when they became adults. For example, I was unaware that my father was a dual citizen and that he renounced his Japanese citizenship later in life. However, this practice is less in use in recent years, as married children who move away generally start their own family koseki in the city in which they reside. This makes it more difficult to trace one's family tree, as one would need to find out where other family members have moved to see their koseki. What is the koseki used for other than as a legal document for identifying Japanese citizens? Well, copies are required as a legal document for identification when people apply for a passport, get married, register or inherit property, seek employment, and register at a school. The contents of a koseki were originally based on the traditional family unit or household. Therefore, the members of the household, as described previously, would be listed in the koseki. So this could include 3 generations of a family, including yoshi members. The standard information is listed on the slide. Place of residence, name and birth date of the husband or head of household, date of household establishment, marriage date and place, names and birth dates of parents and grandparents, name and birth date of the head of household's wife, names, birth dates, and birthplaces of children, grandchildren, the head of household siblings, listed in order of birth date, death dates. It may include occupations, religion, criminal activity, and up to 1947, the family's social class. Here's the standard format for a koseki, showing how the content is arranged. As this would be written in Japanese, it would be read from right to left. So you can see there's 2 sections. The upper section provides some details. The lower section provides the names of all the members of the household. Here is a sample from my father's family. Notice the Xed boxes in the sample. Names are crossed off or, quote, removed from the koseki for one of the following reasons. The person passes away, person is entered in another koseki. For example, when a daughter gets married, not to a yoshi, then her name is crossed off and she is added to her husband's koseki or her husband's family koseki. A person is divorced, so the non-biological spouse is removed. A person is a yoshi, so this would be a son who would be added to the adoptee's family koseki. When all names are crossed off, then the koseki is archived or, quote, expired and is referred to as a joseki. So the koseki would have the current living members, and the joseki would have all those who have passed away or moved to another family or koseki. Now, in order to obtain a copy of your family's koseki and joseki, you will need to write a formal request and submit it to the city government office where it is filed. This will be a very difficult process for several reasons. One, you will be going through a government office which has a standard process, and this is a non-standard request, which will not have all the proper forms and required documents that are normally submitted. 2, if it is written in English coming from a foreign country, this further complicates the understanding of your request. And 3, Japan has strict privacy laws that govern access to kosekis. So if the request does not fit within this criteria or sufficient justification is not provided, then the request may be rejected and or ignored. This is not to discourage attempting to obtain your family's koseki, but to give a realistic expectation of success. Just to be transparent, I have not attempted to request my own family's koseki through this process and have only read of other people's experiences. However, I wanted to at least provide a process that one may be able to obtain their family's koseki. Now, keeping in mind the previous discussion on identifying your furusato, here are the steps to do this. First, determine your ancestor furusato. Second, determine the present administrative jurisdiction of the town, since it is likely it was consolidated into another city. Third, determine the physical or email address of the government office for that city. This can be found by searching on the internet and contacting the Japan National Tourist Organization. Fourth is to write the formal request. Preferably, it should be written in Japanese. You will need to explain why you are requesting the koseki and joseki, since this will be an unusual request that the government official may not understand. In order to help with this request, I composed a letter and had it translated to Japanese that gives a short explanation of how we are Japanese Americans and are searching for our family tree and roots. This letter is available in the reference part of my class materials. Step 5 is to enclose a money order for fees and postage. The fees may vary slightly across cities, but the usual amounts I've seen are 450 yen for the koseki tohon, which is a copy of the koseki, and 750 yen for the joseki tohon, or copy of the expired koseki. Postage is by weight and is estimated to be about 190 yen for the current Japanese postal rates, which covers up to 3.5 ounces, up to 270 yen, which covers up to about 9 ounces. Due to Japanese privacy laws and the unusual nature of this request for government offices, they will want proof or evidence of your family relationship to the ancestor for whom you are requesting the koseki or joseki. This is the chicken and egg dilemma, since this is the information you are seeking. I don't have a good answer for this except to provide any information and documents that you have that could validate your family relationship. So any documents that I discussed that provide any of the requested information could be provided. This would include personal documents such as letters and even photos that may have names written on the back. Anything that would give some validation that this is a legitimate and sincere request to find out about your family tree. Again, I don't know whether you will be successful and get a positive response, but I think it's worth a try. In addition to the administrative and procedural difficulties of making a request, I wanted to point out some other challenges with obtaining and reading the information. First, records may not be available due to retention policies. I had read that joseki records more than 80 years old were being destroyed. However, I don't have a lot of information on this, and it may not be current nor accurate. Some may have been microfilmed and or digitized, but I haven't read any official government reporting on this. But keep in mind that the official nationwide koseki was only enacted in 1871, so these records would have only been available since that time. Only people who were alive at that time would have been recorded on the koseki. Another challenge is that the joseki may be difficult to read because the kanji has changed in recent years, and the kanji for names are generally difficult to read because they can be interpreted and pronounced in different ways. Now, some people ask whether many of these records were destroyed during World War II because of the extensive Allied bombing of Japan, including the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The destruction of records did not have a significant impact for the ancestors of most Japanese Americans because our immigrant ancestors came from small rural towns and villages, while for the most part, only the major industrial or port cities were bombed, such as Tokyo, Kobe, Osaka, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki. An exception was Okinawa, as it was estimated that 50% or more of the Okinawan koseki and other genealogical records were destroyed. However, there are active groups in Okinawa and Hawaii that try to reconstruct some of the information from memory. As far as how successful Japanese Americans have been in obtaining copies of their koseki and joseki, it appears to be mixed. I can only convey what I have read and been told by others. Generally, as I discussed, not that many people have attempted to make requests themselves due to all the difficulties that I mentioned. That is, finding where to send the request, how to explain the request to the government office, lacking documents that prove their relationship that are required by the government. Given these difficulties, I have some suggestions for other resources that may be able to help you. If you have friends in Japan who are willing to help you, then they might be able to have better success in finding the right government office, filling out the right forms, and writing a request that explains the reason for this request. You will need to give them written permission to release the document to a non-family member, and will still need to provide all the information and documents that the government requires to find the koseki and validate your identity and relationship to satisfy the privacy restrictions. Having friends help in submitting the request won't overcome the obstacles of providing proof of your relationship with your ancestor, but it at least makes it easier. Another suggestion is to contact the Mormon Family History Center in Tokyo. As you may know, the Mormon Church, or Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, embraces and promotes genealogy for their members because they believe that families can be together in the afterlife. Therefore, identifying all family members, living and dead, through genealogy is important to satisfying this belief. To help members with their genealogical research, the Church established family history centers around the world, with the main one located in Salt Lake City, which is called the Family History Library. These centers are free and open to the public. The Family History Library in Salt Lake City has an abundance of resources with billions of records of genealogical data from around the world. They have a website for which you can access all of these records. I mentioned the Family History Center in Tokyo because they have the knowledge and genealogical resources specific to Japanese and may be able to assist in requesting kosekis. I have heard from someone who is familiar with my class tell me that they contacted the Tokyo Family History Center and asked them to make a koseki request on their behalf. They did make the request and were able to obtain the koseki and joseki, and even translated them to English and sent them back, and did not even ask for or charge a fee. I had emailed them about 15 years ago asking if they would perform the service for other Japanese Americans, and of course they were reluctant to commit to this, but it would seem to be worth a try. Again, you would need to provide all the information and documents that would normally be required as if you were making the request. For those who have immigrant ancestors that went to Hawaii, the Japanese consulate in Hawaii has offered assistance to Japanese Americans to research their roots. So you can email them at the email address I list below or visit their website. There are other sources of genealogical information in Japan. The most common one that is available is the Kakocho, or Book of the Past, which is a book that is manually maintained at a Buddhist temple, which contains the names of deceased members of the temple. Kakochos can be several hundred years old, as the picture shows the Kakocho from my mother's family, and we were told that it dates back to the 1600s. Finding the Kakocho has several difficulties as well. The main one being finding the temple where your ancestors were members. Of course, it would be in the same town as your furusato, if you know the furusato and are able to locate it. Then you can narrow down the possible temples. However, it will be difficult to identify local temples through the internet, such as Google Maps, or through a search of temples in a certain jurisdiction because of the language barrier, assuming that you can't read Japanese. It would also be difficult to confirm that a specific temple is the one where your ancestors were members. Then it is uncertain whether the temple still had the original Kakocho that was maintained from the time the temple recorded names in it. Again, I don't want to discourage people from seeking the temple and Kakocho, since this would be an extremely useful document for your family tree research, but I just wanted to point out the potential challenges. There are some other sources of genealogical information. The Jumin Hyo is similar to the Koseki, except it is a more It is more of an address directory for all residents. This would be useful in trying to locate relatives who may be living in the same area as your furusato. The last two items, the ihai and bohime or sekito, have similar information that are in the kakocho, as they have the name and the Buddhist posthumous name or kaimyo for a deceased relative. Ihai are translated as spirit, memorial, mortuary, or ancestral tablet, are found at the local Buddhist temple, home of the eldest son, or at the family butsudan. Bohime or sekito are gravestone inscriptions. As with the koseki and kakocho, each of these items have similar difficulties in locating them, which comes down to finding the furusato, the ancestor's Buddhist temple, and in the case of the gravestones, finding the family cemetery or the cemetery where your ancestors may be buried. This concludes the main topic of the presentation on the basic information and sources needed for researching your Japanese family tree. I talk about family names or surnames, or myoji, because they are inherently part of one's family history, as the meaning and background of a family name is tied to the origins of the family. Family names reflect not only family history, but also the customs and norms of Japanese society. Note that until relatively recently, up until the 1870s, the vast majority of Japanese did not have family names. This is because having a family name symbolized a family's status, privilege, and power. So for the most part, only the highest levels of society, the nobility and the warrior class, known as bushi or samurai, had family names, and they were the only ones allowed to have family names. Most of the rest of the population, or the quote commoners, were banned from using family names. This all changed when the Family Registration Law of 1871 was enacted that allowed all citizens to use family names. This is the same law that enacted the koseki, which required registration of every citizen. Family names became necessary since the koseki was structured around the household or extended family, and it also required each person to have an individual identity. So a personal name was insufficient to identify an individual as being a part of a specific family. So this law had the impact of allowing and forcing all families to have family names. Since the vast majority of the population did not have family names, they had to essentially create or choose one so they could register in their koseki. There were no specific guidelines or rules for choosing names, so people chose names for a variety of reasons, including estate, manor, and house names, otherwise known as yago, town and village names, because there were over 70,000 villages in 1868, geographical area names, quote, field names, myo of myoji means young rice plants, which also refers to the piece of private land which had names, elements of nature, traditional or prestigious family names, which normally meant the samurai family names or clan family names, family names of distant or higher class relatives, occupations, guilds, collectives, associations, and selection by their local priests. A study of family names found that more than 80% were derived from place names or nature. I'll be giving examples of these categories of names. Based on the phenomena where the majority of Japanese chose names based on places or nature, this is probably the reason for the following. And I want to caveat this that these are my own conclusions and observations and not based on any formal studies. There is a higher occurrence of unrelated families with the same name in the same area. For example, if several families chose the name of their village as their family name. I had one person in one of my classes whose family name is Miyagishima, who claimed that her family originated in the town of Miyagishima and all the Miyagishimas were related, at least in the United States. I didn't question her, and it may be true, but one would need to go back to the original ancestors who took on the Miyagishima family name to see if, one, they happened to all come from the town of Miyagishima, and two, if they were related. The second observation is that unrelated families with the same name in different areas, for example, if several families chose the name of a common environment that is in a different region of Japan, such as Yamada or mountain rice field. So when people ask if they might be related to another family with the same family name, it is possible, but depending on their furusato, it is probably not very likely based on how names were chosen. Another interesting point is that Japan has the greatest number of different family names of any country, over 100,000. And that is with people predominantly from one ethnic origin. So the U.S. is excluded since the vast majority of its population are immigrants or descendants of immigrants. This may indicate that families with relatively unique names have a higher chance of being related, but I haven't seen any studies on this. Looking at the statistic that 16% of the population share the top 20 family names seems to indicate, just from common sense, that all those families with the same family names aren't related. Now, by comparison, other countries, especially China and Korea, have far fewer different surnames, with a much higher proportion sharing just a few names. For example, in Korea, half the population share the top 5 family names, and 20% of the population, which is an incredibly high number, have the Kim family name. It is known that most of them are not related because most Korean family names were chosen, like in Japan, and Kim was popular because it was the family name of nobility in ancient Korea, so many families wanted to have that perspective attached to their family. This was just a side note that I learned when I was researching Japanese names. The other thing to consider is to not focus just on your own family name, since those in your family tree who have your family name are just a small fraction of everyone in your family tree. For example, just counting ancestors, there are only 2 people in each generation with your same family name, that is, your parents, your father's parents, etc. So after 20 generations, you have over 2 million ancestors, but only 40 who share your family name. This doesn't count the other relatives, for example, your cousins, your aunts and uncles, etc., but the proportion of all relatives with your same family name is still relatively small. Therefore, everyone will have relatives and ancestors with other family names, and each will have a different meaning and history for their families. Japanese family names were usually chosen for a specific meaning and relationship to the family origins. So determining the meaning of your family name will give you additional information about your family history. The meaning is often determined from the interpretation of the kanji characters that comprise the name. Japanese family names often consist of 2 kanji characters, with names consisting of 1 or 4 characters or more being rare. For example, taking 2 relatively common family names, Yamada, Yama meaning mountain, and Da meaning rice field, so combined it means mountain rice field. For Tanaka, the Ta, which uses the same kanji character as the Da and Yamada, also means rice field, and Naka means middle, so combined it means middle of the rice field. I chose these examples because the Yama and Da or Ta kanji were popular choices and are part of 30 of the 100 most common family names in Japan. The generic commonality of these place nouns also may be the reason why they are so popular. Is because much of the Japanese population who did not have family names at the time of the enactment of the Koseki law lived in mountainous areas, as most of Japan's geography is considered mountainous, and that's where the commoners lived in the 1800s, and or worked in rice fields. Since rice is the primary staple crop of Japan, rice field may also have been chosen because of this significance. While you may be able to determine the meaning of your family name just based on the Romaji or transliterated spelling, transliterated is the official linguistic term for translating the name from kanji to Romaji spelling. It is important to know your name, how your name is written in kanji. Also note that the meaning of a name may not be a literal translation of the kanji characters, but the combination could represent a conceptual meaning, or a kanji character could represent an abbreviated form of a concept. For example, my name, Hashizume, consists of two kanji, Hashi meaning bridge, and Zume or Tsume meaning claw or nail. The literal translation doesn't make sense, but when I asked a relative in Japan, he explained it meant at the end of the bridge or near the bridge. And the reason was that when my family was formed, the spouses decided to choose a new family name, and they chose Hashizume because their home was, quote, at the end of a bridge in the town that they were living. Determining the kanji for your name is also important because some kanji can be read and pronounced in different ways depending on how it is combined with other kanji and the intended way it was to be read. Of course, a stranger, even if they were Japanese, would not know the intended reading and pronunciation. For example, the kanji characters shown can be read as either Seijin or Yasuhito. This would not be an issue for your own family name, but it may be an issue for other relatives with different family names for whom you don't know their names. For example, I knew my paternal grandmother's maiden name was Kajitani, but when another relative unfamiliar with her name read the kanji, he read it differently. I don't remember how he read it, only that it wasn't Kajitani. If you don't know how your family name is written in kanji, you may be able to use the common spellings. However, there may be different ways of spelling a name in kanji, even though it is read and pronounced the same. For example, taking the name Saito, there are over 100 different kanji for sai and over 200 for to, so there are potentially thousands of different combinations. However, there's only one correct way of writing your family name in kanji. Also note that if you are trying to determine the kanji based on the American Romaji spelling, that is how you spell it, that this may be misleading because of how Japanese names were transliterated from how they were read and pronounced. For example, a Japanese family spelled their name as Mori, M-O-R-E-Y, but pronounced it the same as if it were spelled M-O-R-I, which is the standard transliteration of this name. So keep in mind that you would need to find the standard transliteration of the kanji in order to determine the true kanji for spelling for your name. Here are the 10 most common family names in Japan, how they are usually written in kanji, and their meanings. Note that 3 of the names are derived from the Fujiwara name, even though they're not pronounced the same. This is because Fujiwara was one of the original clans in Japan and is well known in Japanese history. The names are branch families of the Fujiwara clan, and the names were formed by using the kanji character for Fuji. Notice the second character in the Sato, Ito, and Kato names, and was pronounced as To or Do. Also, the meaning of these names is not a literal translation of the kanji, but an abbreviated contraction of the Fujiwara name and the location of the branch family. For example, the Sa in Sato came from the area known as Sano in Tochigi Prefecture, which is where the branch family was formed. So the combination of these kanji came to mean the Fujiwara of Sano, similarly for Ito and Kato. The reason these family names are so popular is because of the association with the Fujiwara clan. There are several other names that are among the top 100 most popular names in Japan, including Saito, Goto, Kondo, Kudo, Endo, and Ando. I read that 30% of the population have names that are derived from the Fujiwara clan. This may be true, but it doesn't mean that these 30% are descended from the Fujiwara clan or are related to that family or to each other. As previously mentioned, the rice field and mountain kanji were among the most common parts of the most popular family names chosen. Here are some of the variations of names using these kanji and their meanings. As far as the reasons why these specific variations were chosen or created, I haven't seen any studies. It may be as simple as that was the location where the family was located, as in the case of my name, or it may be that for other reasons that may only be known by older family members. Yamada, mountain rice field; Ikeda, pond rice field; Hamada, beach rice field; Morita, forest rice field, etc. And for the mountain derivations, we've seen Yamada, mountain rice field; Yamashita, mountain under; Yamaguchi, mountain entrance; Yamamoto, mountain base; and Yamashiro, mountain castle. Here are other ways in which family names were chosen. Myo or field names are related to the names derived from the rice field kanji, da or ta, but use more descriptive terms. For example, the kanji for tomi or rich is often used: shigetomi, yasutomi, hisatomi, etc. The kanji for yoshi or good is also used: yoshino, yoshitomi, ineyoshi. Occupation was another common way of choosing names. Those who had a store or shop appended ya, which means store or shop or seller of goods. For example, komeya means rice merchant, and yaoya means greengrocer. Profession or guild names were noted by appending be. For example, amabe are fishermen, isobe are seaweed gatherers, sakebe are brewers. As previously mentioned, branch family names derived from the Fujiwara clan were popular. Here are some other clan family names that were adopted. Note that many of these names were based on the same reasons that I previously discussed for the majority of Japanese who didn't have a family name. For example, the quote rice field names starting or ending in da or ta, such as Shibata, Takeda, Ishida, Oda, Kuroda. This concludes the discussion on family names. The final section will cover family crests or kamon. Similar to family names, family crests symbolize the family, and so names and crests were inherently tied to each other. Also like family names, crests were symbols of a family stature. Therefore, it was generally allowed and used only for the nobility and other upper classes, such as the warrior class. In the Heian era, generally only the nobility had family crests. In the Kamakura era, samurai families began using crests for identification on the battlefield, so they could distinguish between their forces from their enemies. Common people began using crests from the 1600s, even though they may not have had a family name, nor were they formally allowed to have a family crest. Starting in the Meiji era, coinciding with the Koseki law and the requirement to have family names, family crests became popular among all families. In recent times, as traditional families have changed, the importance of the kamon has diminished and is mostly used for ceremonial occasions. So most families, if not all, have a family crest, but the design is not unique to the family or family name. In other words, different unrelated families have the same family crest, and unrelated families with the same family name may have and probably do have different family crests. Like family names, most family crests were chosen for various reasons, but families were not restricted to certain designs or required to have a relationship between the family name and crest design. Some of the more common ways that family crests were chosen are that related to something about your ancestor, related to locality in which your ancestor lived, symbol of good fortune, bestowed by a lord as a gift to those who served him, transferred to the family by marriage, borrowed from important, well-respected family, other special meaning related to your family, simply made up or chosen based on personal preference. Because of how family crests were chosen, and the inherent link between the family crest and the family name, which are both linked to a specific family line, this explains why there is no correlation between unrelated families with the same family crest and unrelated families with the same family name who have different family crests. Since there's no registration of family crest, like the Koseki, you will need to find a crest from some family items or through relatives. Items that might have the family crest, shown on this slide, are ceremonial kimonos, gravestones, noren or curtains, and family ihai, the mortuary or ancestral tablets that I talked about earlier. Of course, unless you have or have access to these items would be difficult to find, as your relatives in Japan would probably be the only ones who would have these items. So you would need to find relatives in Japan to show you the family crest. I was fortunate, as I was able to get the family crest for both my mother's family and my father's family, because we knew of relatives in Japan and contacted them for this information. However, most people would not know of relatives in Japan, so finding the family crest is reliant on finding relatives in Japan. Most, if not all, kimono designs are symbolic of some concept or ideology and/or some aspect of family history. Some of the different types of symbolism are patterns, where different groups of people prefer different types of patterns. Family name identification. Some designs were linked to family names. For example, the sakura or cherry blossom was tied to the Sakurai family. Auspicious. Some designs symbolize good fortune, longevity, good health, prosperity, happiness. Commemoration. Some designs represented an important event in the family's history. For example, 2 cranes appearing before a victorious battle. Warrior spirit. The samurai preferred designs that symbolized their warrior spirit, such as those with weapons or armament. For example, swords, bows, arrows, armor, or brave animals, for example, hawks, lions, and tigers. Religious symbols from the Buddhist, Shinto, or Confucian religions. And superstitious symbols of good luck charms. Note that for many kimono designs, there are many variations of the same basic design, but the true design for your kimono is only one of the variations. In the example below, which is a flower, this design is a tachibana or orange blossom. You see that there are variations in the number of petals, whether there is a circle around it, whether the flower is black on a white background or white in a black background. Again, your relatives would probably be the best source to confirm the true kimono design. Another exception to note is that sometimes females have a different kimono than male members of their family. I'm not that familiar with this exception, as I have just heard from others that females inherit their mother's or mother-in-law's kimono. Under the normal traditions, as I understand them, the kimono is tied to the family name and family. So females would either be under their biological family kimono, or if they get married, they would be under their husband's family kimono. So I don't know the conditions under which a female would have a kimono other than these 2 alternatives. This concludes the class, except for a list of key reference sources that will be useful for your research that are on the following slides. The U.S. National Archives contains a great deal of historical records that are helpful for Japanese Americans and provide guidance for those researching their genealogy. For more information, see the websites that I list below. The U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services, formerly the Immigration and Naturalization Service, also has several types of historical records, as well as a genealogy program useful for Japanese Americans. For more information on that program, see the website link below. As probably many of you are aware, Ancestry.com has a searchable online database of billions of records that are useful to Americans of all national origins, as well as Japanese Americans. I list some of the record types that are most useful to Japanese Americans. There may be others as they update their database all the time. Access to Ancestry.com databases is a fee service, but they usually have a free trial that allows you to search as much as you want during the trial period. If you know how to search and spend some time doing it, you'll be able to obtain many relevant records free of charge. As I mentioned previously in the discussion about requesting your koseki, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the Mormon Church, is a tremendous source for general genealogical information, as well as billions of relevant records, the same as Ancestry.com. Records can be searched online, which includes some of the same records that are available in Ancestry.com, but also genealogies submitted by church members as well as the public. This enables one to search through other family trees for potential relatives so that you can discover more branches in your family tree.